Queen stood in the middle of the council chamber with her hands at her sides. The room was cold, and it smelled like metal and something else that she could not name. The ambassador was tall enough that had to tilt her head back to see his face. His skin was dark blue, and it moved like water when he breathed. His 3 eyes looked down at her, and she could feel the weight of his stare. "Your Majesty," the ambassador said. His voice sounded like music mixed with the rumble of an engine. The translator on his wrist turned his words into English. "We have completed our evaluation of your species. The results are clear." Did not move. She did not show fear because she had learned long ago that showing fear was the same as losing. Her diplomacy team stood behind her. She could feel Colonel Hayes standing in the back corner. She could hear the breathing of Dr. Lawrence next to her. Stood near the door, and his hand was steady even though knew he was afraid. "What evaluation?" asked. Her voice was calm. It was the voice she had learned to use when fire was closing in around her during her firefighting days. The voice that said you have a job to do and you will do it. "Your civilization," the ambassador continued, "has reached a critical point. You have developed technology that allows you to leave your world, but you lack the understanding to use it safely. You have weapons that could destroy your own species. You have governments that fight each other instead of working together. You have resources that you are destroying through ignorance." He stepped closer and saw others move into the chamber behind him. They were even larger than the ambassador, and their skin was marked with thick lines that looked like scars. These were warriors, thought. These were the ones who took what they wanted. "The Galactic Council has decided," the ambassador said, "that Earth must be brought into the greater community. You will be integrated into our systems. Your governments will be dissolved. Your military forces will be disbanded. Your people will be reassigned to roles that serve the greater good." His heart was beating fast, but she did not let her face change. She had seen videos of other worlds that had been integrated. She had seen the camps where people waited for their new assignments. She had seen the children separated from their parents. "And if we refuse?" asked. The ambassador made a sound that might have been laughter. "You will be destroyed, not out of hatred, not out of anger, but because resistance to integration only causes suffering. We offer you the mercy of absorption instead of the pain of extinction." Looked around the chamber. She could see the fear in the eyes of her advisors. She could see the certainty in the eyes of the did not believe there was any choice to make. They believed they were offering mercy. They did not understand that they were asking humanity to stop being human. "I want to negotiate," said. "There is nothing to negotiate," the ambassador replied. "The decision is made. You will be given 1 month to convince your world to accept integration peacefully. If you refuse, we will begin forced integration." Felt the words hit her like a fist. 1 month, 30 days to save her entire species. She spoke quietly, so quietly that the translator almost missed her words. "I want to propose a trial. According to the laws of the Galactic Council, any species facing integration has the right to request a formal hearing before the full council. I am requesting that hearing now." The ambassador stopped moving. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence and saw something change in his expression. He had not expected her to know the laws. He had not expected her to use them. He had assumed that she was simple, that she was a figure to control, not a woman who had studied every document about the Galactic Council that humanity's intelligence services could access. "The request is noted," the ambassador said. "You will have your hearing, but you will remain here as a guest of the Empire until that hearing takes place." Understood what that meant. Guest meant prisoner. It meant she would be watched and controlled. It meant she would be separated from her people and kept away from those who could help her fight. It meant she had to be very careful about what she did next. But it also meant she had time. It meant she had a chance to speak before the entire Galactic Council. It meant that her refusal to accept their mercy had somehow cracked the certainty in the ambassador's voice. The guards came forward then and let them take her arm without fighting. She let them lead her from the council chamber into the corridors of the station that hung above Earth like a threat. She let them lock her in a room with a viewport that showed the planet below. She saw the 3 ships that hung in the atmosphere like hunters over prey. And she did something that they would never understand. She did not despair. She did not break down. She did not spend the night crying for her family or mourning the world that was about to be taken from her. Instead, she began to plan. She began to think about the laws she had studied. She began to think about the weaknesses in the logic. She began to think about what made humanity different. They believed that they were superior because they had better technology. They believed that they were better because they were stronger and faster and smarter, but had spent 8 years running into burning buildings. She had learned something that they had not. She had learned that strength came in many forms. She had learned that humans could adapt. She had learned that humans could endure. She had learned that humans could find a way forward even when the path forward should not exist. She sat by the viewport and she watched Earth turn beneath the ships, and she thought about what she would say when she stood before the council. She thought about the words that might make them understand. She thought about what it meant to be human, and she knew that no empire, no matter how advanced or how powerful, could take that away from her. The guards did not know that had hidden a communication device in the hem of her dress. They did not know that was already receiving her transmissions. The ambassador did not know that he had made a critical mistake when he granted her the right to a formal hearing. He had given a human woman a platform. He had given her a voice, and he had no idea what she would do with it. Looked at her reflection in the dark viewport and she smiled. They had come to take her world, but they had made one fundamental error. They had expected her to beg. They had prepared their weapons and their arguments for a queen who would fall down and plead for mercy. They had never prepared for a queen who would stand and fight, had not always been a queen. Before the crown, before the ceremonies, before the responsibility of leading a world, she had been a different person. She had been a firefighter in Boston. She had been the kind of person who heard sirens and ran toward the sound instead of away from it. Her father had been a high school teacher who taught mathematics. Her mother had been a nurse in a public hospital. They had raised their daughter to believe that your life meant nothing if you did not use it to help others, had believed them. She had spent 8 years fighting fire and saving people. She had learned things in those years that no classroom could teach her. She had learned about fear and how to work despite it. She had learned about exhaustion and how to keep moving anyway. She had learned that people could do impossible things when someone they trusted was telling them it was possible. These were the lessons that kept her alive in the prison. The communication device hidden in her dress was incredibly small. It was one of humanity's few technological achievements that had impressed Dr. The device could receive and send messages through a quantum entanglement system that they could not detect or decode. Was on the other end, and he had been waiting for her signal. The first message she sent was simple: "They have taken me. I am alive. I have a hearing in 10 days. Prepare." The response came within seconds: "All secure, is ready. Where do you need us?" Had to be careful. They monitored her room, but not constantly. They did not think she was dangerous. They did not think a human queen locked in a station could pose any threat to their empire. This was their mistake. She had spent the first 3 days studying the system. She had learned how their computers worked. She had learned how their defense networks operated. She had learned that everything they did was based on the assumption that no one in the galaxy could challenge their technological superiority. She wrote too, "We need Doctor to work on something. We need a weapon that disrupts quantum processors. They use quantum systems for everything. If we can corrupt those systems, even for a few minutes, we can move." His response was slower this time. When it came, knew he was showing it to and Doctor. She could imagine them in some underground bunker looking at her message, understanding what she was asking them to do. The response came: "Not possible. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Doctor says even theoretically it would take years to develop. His hands shook, but she kept her face calm. She knew what she was asking was impossible. She also knew that impossible things happened. She typed back, "Tell Doctor that we do not have years. Tell him that he is smarter than he believes. Tell him that humanity has done impossible things before." In the bunker in Nevada, Dr. Lawrence was working on equations that should not exist. He had spent his entire career studying quantum mechanics at a theoretical level. He had never built anything. He had never worked with the kind of energy systems that would be needed for what was asking. But something about her message made him understand that this was not about what was theoretically possible. This was about what they had to make possible, because the alternative was the end of human freedom. He started with what they knew. They knew that solar radiation could be captured and converted. They knew that radiation moved in patterns that could be predicted. They knew that if those patterns could be amplified to a specific frequency, they might, theoretically, create interference in quantum systems. The word "might" was important. It meant that it could work. It also meant that it might not. But Doctor was a human, and humans had a way of making impossible things happen. Had another job to do while she waited for Doctor's work to progress. She had to make the trust her. She had to convince them that she was beginning to accept the reality of her situation. She had to become someone they did not see as a threat. She started by being difficult in small ways. When they brought her food, she complained about it. When they offered her clothing, she refused and demanded human clothes. When they tried to enter her room without permission, she made a scene. These small rebellions made her seem less dangerous. A person who was planning something would not waste energy on trivial complaints. A person who was planning something would be quiet and obedient. But was doing something else entirely. She was mapping the station. Every time a guard came into her room, she memorized which direction they came from. Every time she was allowed to walk in the corridors, she counted her steps and noted the location of exits. She was learning the geography of her prison. On the 8th day, she sent another message too. "I need to know where they are holding the human prisoners. I need coordinates." His response was quick. "They have them in 4 locations on the station. Detention blocks 1 through 4. Why?" Did not answer because the answer would tell him what she was planning, and she did not want him to know until the moment when he had to know. She did not want his fear to show up in his face when he was working with. She did not want him to try to talk her out of something that had to be done. Instead, she focused on her hearing. She studied the Galactic Council's laws. She read testimony from other species that had been integrated. She looked for the moment when she could crack their logic, when she could make them see that what they were doing was wrong. And she waited for Doctor's message. It came on the 10th day. The message was brief. "We have it. It will work for approximately 6 hours before they can reset the system. We are preparing the launch." Closed her eyes. Doctor had done the impossible. He had created something that should not exist. He had given them a window, a small window, a dangerous window, but a window nonetheless. She sent her final message before the operation began. "When the lights flicker, everyone moves. Knows the plan. Save the children first. I love all of you." She did not expect a response, and none came. Was busy doing what she had asked him to do, was preparing her forces. Doctor was making sure his impossible machine was ready. And sat in her room and waited for the lights to flicker. She waited for the moment when everything would change. She waited for them to realize that they had made a terrible mistake when they imprisoned a woman who had spent her life running toward danger. She waited, and she did not beg. She did not break. She did not surrender. She simply waited, and she planned, and she prepared to do what had to be done. The lights in his room flickered at exactly 600 hours. The flicker lasted for 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, every system on the station began to fail. Doctor's weapon was not perfect. It was not designed to destroy. It was designed to confuse. The quantum processors that controlled the ship began to receive contradictory instructions. The defense systems that protected the station went haywire. The communication networks that connected to their ships and to each other became unreliable and slow. For 6 hours, they would be blind and confused. For 6 hours, human forces would have a chance to move. Did not wait for anyone to come get her. She ran to the door and yanked it open. The guard who stood outside was already confused by the alarms that were blaring throughout the station. He reached for her, but had spent 8 years fighting fire in burning buildings. She knew how to move fast. She knew how to use her size and weight against someone larger. She drove her shoulder into his midsection and felt the air rush out of his lungs. He fell, and she ran. The corridors of the station were becoming chaos, were running in different directions, trying to understand what was happening. The lights were flickering. The gravity generators were failing and then succeeding and then failing again. Ran down corridors that she had memorized, taking turns that she had counted in her mind during her walks. She heard footsteps behind her. They had recovered faster than expected. Of course they had. They were a species that had conquered 1,000 worlds. They would not be defeated by a simple system failure. A warrior rounded the corner in front of her. He was at least 7 feet tall, and his skin was marked with the scars of 100 battles. He reached out to grab her, and Jennifer Cooper appeared from a side corridor and hit him with a pulse rifle. They fell, and Jennifer grabbed his arm. Jennifer had been a human soldier stationed on the ship as some kind of goodwill gesture. They had kept her alive to serve as a bridge between species. They had never expected her to be anything other than cooperative. They had been wrong. Jennifer had been waiting for this moment for months. "The launch bay is 200 meters ahead," Jennifer said. She was moving fast, pulling through the chaos. "Colonel Hayes has a fighter ready. We are not taking prisoners." They ran past Detention Block 1 and heard the screams of human prisoners being released. She heard people running, heard families calling out to each other. The resistance had planned this carefully. They were getting people out. They were getting them to safety. They were doing what humans did best. They were adapting to the situation and moving forward. At Detention Block 2, saw children being led toward the escape ships by human soldiers. These were the children that they had separated from their families. These were the ones who had been deemed too young to be useful and too old to be raised properly as. They were crying and confused, but they were alive. Jennifer pulled away from the spectacle. There was no time to help. There was no time to comfort. There was only time to move. They reached the launch bay to find waiting in a captured fighter. The ship was small, designed for short-range operations, but it was fast. Had removed the pilot from the ship and left him unconscious in a supply closet. She had spent 3 weeks learning how to fly a fighter from stolen computer files. She was not an expert, but she was good enough. "Get in," said as soon as appeared. "We are losing the window. They are starting to stabilize their systems." Threw herself into the co-pilot seat. Jennifer strapped in behind them as fired up the engines. The fighter lifted off the deck with a lurch that made stomach drop. Through the viewport she could see other ships rising from the station. Human ships, human fighters, human shuttles full of prisoners. The nearest ship began to move. Its weapons systems were not yet back online, but its thrusters were working. It moved to block the launch bay exit. "We are not going to make it," said. "Yes, we are," replied. She pushed the fighter forward at full speed. The ship grew larger in the viewport. Could see the hull markings now. Could see the weapons ports starting to glow as they came online. Did not slow down. She increased speed. She was going to ram the ship. I said, "Hold on," said. At the last possible second, pulled the fighter down and to the right. The ship had not expected this. Its weapons systems fired, but they fired where the human fighter should have been, not where it actually was. Threaded the needle between the ship and the station. The fighter emerged into open space, and she pushed the throttle to maximum. Below them, Earth was turning. could see the blue of the oceans, the brown of the continents. She could see the atmosphere that protected all life on the world she had sworn to defend. She could see the world that they had tried to take. Behind them, dozens of human ships were breaking through the chaos and heading toward the planet's surface. The forces were still recovering from the system failure. Doctor's weapon had given them exactly what they needed: a moment of confusion, a moment of vulnerability, a moment when humans could do what they did best. They could run toward danger instead of away from it. They could make impossible choices. They could fight for people they loved instead of for abstract concepts like duty or honor. They could look at a being that was 1,000 times more advanced and say no. We will not go quietly. The fighter descended toward Earth and brought it down in the middle of the Nevada desert where the bunker waited. As soon as they touched ground, shut down the engines and turned to look at. "We just started a war," said. "We started a rebellion," corrected. "There is a difference." "Is there?" asked. Did not answer. She unbuckled her restraints and walked toward the hatch. When she opened the door, she saw the desert stretching out in every direction. She saw the sun rising over the horizon. She heard the sound of other ships landing around them. She heard the sound of human voices calling out to each other. She heard the sound of victory, small and fragile, but real. And she understood something that they had never understood. Humanity did not need to be 1,000 years ahead in technology to be powerful. Humanity did not need superior weapons to resist. Humanity just needed to refuse to accept someone else's version of the truth. Humanity just needed to stand up and say no. Doctor's weapon had given them 6 hours. In those 6 hours, they had escaped. In those 6 hours, they had freed thousands of prisoners. In those 6 hours, they had shown that they were not as defenseless as they believed. But now the real fight would begin. Now they would have to do what they had never done before. They would have to take on an empire and win. The Galactic Council chamber was projected into the war room in Nevada through a holographic transmission system that Doctor had rigged together using technology and human ingenuity. The image was clear enough to see the faces of the beings who ruled 1,000 worlds. It was clear enough to see their surprise when walked up to the platform and began to speak. She had prepared for this moment. She had studied every law, every precedent, every moment when another species had stood before the council and tried to defend themselves. Most of them had failed. Most of them had been integrated anyway, but was not most of them. "I am Queen of Earth," she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced this speech 1,000 times in her mind. She had practiced it in the mirror. She had practiced it with and Doctor. She was ready. "I stand before this council to accuse the species of violating the foundational laws that govern this entire galactic community." The advocate, a female named, stood up immediately. "The Queen of Earth has attempted to destroy one of our orbital stations. She has freed prisoners who were being processed according to proper procedures. She has caused the deaths of 17 warriors. This is not a legal defense. This is an act of war." "I did not start a war," said. "You started one when you attempted to erase my civilization without consent." Made a sound that might have been anger or might have been laughter. "You did not have consent to refuse integration. The Council's evaluation showed that your species was a threat to galactic stability. Your weapons were developing in dangerous directions. Your governments were chaotic. Your society was destroying itself and its own world. We offered you the mercy of integration." "You offered us destruction," said. She turned so that she could see all of the council members, not just the, "You arrived at our world. You told us what would happen to us. You gave us no choice. You said integration or extinction. That is not mercy. That is coercion." A counselor, a being made of silver liquid contained in a transparent sphere, made a sound of agreement. "The Queen makes a valid point. The integration protocol requires consent of at least a 70% majority of the population being integrated." Moved forward. The integration protocol allows for override in cases where the species poses an immediate threat to galactic stability. Threat based on what evaluation? Asked. Her voice was getting louder now. She could feel the anger underneath her words, and she let it show. You evaluated my people based on our technology and our weapons. You did not evaluate what we actually are. And what are you? A crystalline being asked. Its voice sounded like wind through a canyon. What quality do you possess that would prevent integration? Took a breath. This was the moment. This was where she had to say something that would make them understand. We are the species that chooses to be alive instead of safe, she said. We are the species that loves our children so much that we would rather die than see them enslaved. We are the species that looks at beings 1,000 times more powerful than we are and says no anyway. We are the species that creates art and music and literature, not because it helps us survive, but because it makes us feel like our lives matter. We are the species that builds and builds even though we know everything we build will eventually be destroyed. We do it anyway because the act of building is what makes us human. She paused and the chamber was silent. You evaluated us and found us insufficient, continued. But you evaluated the wrong things. You looked for military strength. You looked for technological advancement. You looked for rational decision-making. What you did not look for is the will to refuse. What you did not look for is the capacity to say no to a god if that god is asking you to be less than yourself. General stood up. He was the commander of military forces, and he was the most powerful being in the chamber besides the council itself. His voice was louder than his presence was heavier. His certainty was absolute. This is irrelevant, he said. The Queen is using emotion as an argument. The Council does not make decisions based on emotion. The Council makes decisions based on logic and security. Then let me be logical, said. She looked directly at. You invaded my world. You took my people. You killed some of them. You imprisoned others. You separated children from their families. And when I refused to accept this, you told me I was illogical. But let me ask you something, General. Did your logic anticipate that Dr. Lawrence, a human physicist working from borrowed technology, would create a weapon capable of disabling your defense systems? Did not answer. Did your logic anticipate that human soldiers would be willing to die to free prisoners? Asked. Did your logic anticipate that a civilian population would be willing to fight against odds so impossible that, by your own calculations, they should have no hope of victory? She walked to the center of the platform and stopped. You assume that you understand everything, she said. You assume that you have evaluated all possibilities. But you did not anticipate me. You did not anticipate human creativity when there is nothing left to lose. You did not anticipate what happens when beings who have nothing decide that they have everything to fight for. The crystalline being spoke again. What would you propose instead of integration? I propose that Earth be recognized as a sovereign member of the Galactic Council, said, with all the rights and responsibilities that status entails. I propose that they withdraw their forces from our space. I propose that all human prisoners be released immediately and allowed to return home. And I propose that this council establish a law that prevents any species from being forced to integrate without the consent of a genuine majority of that species. That is a fundamental change to council law, said. That would affect every integration that is currently in progress. Yes, said, it would, and it should. The vote took place over the next 3 days. Watch from the war room as beings from 1,000 different worlds cast their votes. Some voted in her favor because they believed she was right. Some voted in her favor because they feared what humans might do if given a reason to resist. Some voted in her favor because they saw themselves in her refusal, remembered times when they had been forced to accept things they did not want. The final count was 640 votes in favor, 470 votes against. The integration mandate on Earth was rescinded. General released a statement after the vote was announced. It was brief, but it was more than had expected. The species of Earth have demonstrated a quality of resistance that surpasses mere technological or military achievement, he said. We acknowledge this. We accept the Council's decision. We withdraw our forces from Earth space. It was not an apology. It was not a promise of friendship. But it was a beginning. Was walking through the refugee camp in Central California when she realized she could not be queen anymore. The camp held 15,000 humans, all of them recently released from detention sites. They were sick. They were traumatized. They were broken. But they were alive. An 8-year-old girl came up to her and took her hand. The girl's name was Sarah, and she had been separated from her parents for 6 months. The had told her that her parents were being integrated into another facility. The girl had stopped speaking after that. She had not said a word for 180 days. Now she was holding his hand and was walking with her through the camp. Sarah was not speaking, but she was present. She was there. She was alive, and that was enough. Knew that she could not spend the rest of her life walking through these camps. She knew that she would have to return to the world of politics and government. But for now, she walked. She listened to stories. She held people while they cried. She helped distribute food and water. She did what humans do. She helped. Doctor arrived at the camp 3 weeks after the council vote. He had aged 10 years in the past month. His hair had turned white. His hands shook. But his eyes were clear, and when he saw, he smiled. "We did it," he said. "Yes," said, "we did." "What happens now?" Doctor asked. Did not answer immediately. She looked at Sarah, who was still holding her hand. She thought about the millions of humans who had been freed from the detention sites. She thought about the people who had died during the occupation. She thought about the work that lay ahead. "Now we rebuild," she said. "But not just physically. We rebuild who we are. We rebuild the understanding of what it means to be human." Arrived a week later. She was no longer the military commander of Earth's forces. She had resigned her position and handed control to someone younger, someone from the generation that had known only fear but had learned to fight anyway. Walked into the camp with, and could see that they had both changed in the way that people change when they have seen the worst of what other beings can do and have decided to survive it anyway. "I am starting a school," said without preamble. "For children who have experienced trauma. I want you to be on the board of directors." "I do not know anything about education," said. "You know about courage," replied. "That is all the children need to learn right now, how to be brave even when they are afraid." Said yes because she could not say no. She said yes because these were her people and they needed her. She said yes because being queen meant something different now. It meant standing with people instead of standing above them. Over the next 2 years, worked with the United Nations to establish a new system of government. The old monarchy was dissolved. The queen's position became ceremonial, a symbol of what humanity could do when faced with impossible odds. Instead, the world established a democratic Congress that represented every nation and every people on Earth. Was asked if she wanted to stand for election. She refused. She had done what she needed to do. Now it was time for others to lead. Now it was time for the next generation to shape the world. She returned to Massachusetts, to the town where she had grown up. She bought a house near the fire station where she had worked as a firefighter. She volunteered as a teacher at the local school. She did not give speeches or make political announcements. She lived quietly and worked with children who had been impacted by the occupation. But the world had not forgotten what she had done. Across the galaxy, her name became a symbol. When another species was threatened with forced integration, they asked for a trial before the council. They pointed to the precedent that had set. Slowly, the nature of the Galactic Council changed. Species were no longer forcibly absorbed. The concept of integration became about cooperation instead of coercion. 12 years after the council vote received a visit from General. The general had aged as well. His scars had. His eyes held something that looked like respect. I have come to understand what you understood, said. There is strength in diversity. There is power in allowing species to remain themselves. Did not know how to respond. She had never expected to apologize or to acknowledge his errors. She had simply hoped that the council would change its laws, but was offering something more. He was offering understanding. Why did you come? Asked. To tell you that the children you freed, said, have grown into remarkable adults. They have contributed greatly to the Galactic Council. Some of them serve on the council themselves. They would not exist as individuals if you had not refused to accept what I told you was inevitable. Felt her throat tighten. She thought about the 8-year-old girl, Sarah, who had not spoken for 6 months. Sarah was 19 years old now. She was studying. She was learning how to speak to species across the galaxy so that what happened to humans would never happen to anyone else. Thank you, said Tu. No, replied, the thanks belong to you. After left, sat on her porch and watched the sun set. She thought about the fire station where she had worked. She thought about the burning buildings she had run into. She thought about the people she had saved. She thought about the world she had saved. She was not a hero. Heroes were the ones who fought on the front lines. Heroes were and her soldiers. Heroes were Doctor with his impossible weapon. Heroes were all the humans who had refused to accept the version of the future. Had simply been a woman who had learned one essential truth. When someone tells you to beg and you refuse, it is not the world that changes. It is you. And sometimes that is enough to change everything. She closed her eyes and remembered the moment when the lights on the station flickered. She remembered the moment when human forces broke free from captivity. She remembered standing before the Galactic Council and speaking her truth. And she smiled because she knew that humanity would be okay. Not because they were the most advanced species, not because they had the best technology, but because when it mattered most, they had stood up and said no. They had refused to be less than themselves. That was what made them human. That was what made them powerful. And that was what would protect them for generations to come.